My family disowned me over an inheritance dispute. Years later, I found out the real reason why. My family disowned me over an inheritance dispute. At least, that's what I thought for most of my adult life. I was 24 when it happened. My grandfather had just passed away, and his will turned out to be more of a bombshell than any of us could have expected. He was a complicated man, my grandfather, stern but loving in his own way. He wasn't the warm, fuzzy type, but he had a presence that commanded respect. He had built a successful business from scratch and amassed a small fortune. Growing up, we all heard stories about his tough beginnings and the empire he created. As the oldest grandson, I always assumed I would inherit a good portion of that empire. I was his favorite, after all, at least that's what everyone said. But when the will was read, it became clear that things weren't so straightforward. Granddad had left the bulk of his estate to my cousin, Tim. To me, he left a single item, a small, ornate box with a note inside that said, "To Ethan, the keeper of secrets." No explanation, no money, no property, just that box. I remember looking around the room, seeing my family's confused faces. My father looked furious, my mother shocked, and my siblings. Well, they were just as lost as I was. Tim, on the other hand, looked smug, like he had known all along. The moment the lawyer finished reading the will, the room erupted into chaos. My father's face turned a deep shade of red. He slammed his fist on the table, causing everyone to jump. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, glaring at me as if I were somehow responsible. "What did you do, Ethan?" I was stunned. "Dad, I didn't." "Don't lie to me." He cut me off. "Did you know about this? Did you talk to him before he died?" "No. I swear, I had no idea." I protested, my heart pounding in my chest. My mother was crying silently, her face pale. "How could he do this to us?" she whispered. "To you? To our family?" Tim sat back, crossing his arms with a satisfied smirk on his face. "Maybe he knew something we don't," he said casually. "Maybe Ethan isn't as innocent as he looks." That was the final straw. My father exploded, hurling accusations at me. He was convinced that I had somehow manipulated Granddad, that I had convinced him to cut everyone else out. My siblings chimed in, their voices a mix of anger and betrayal. I tried to defend myself, but it was useless. They wouldn't listen. They were too hurt, too angry. The fight escalated until my father, in a fit of rage, shouted, "Get out. You're no son of mine. You're dead to us." I remember the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. I stumbled back, trying to catch my breath, trying to process what had just happened. My mother turned her back to me, and my siblings wouldn't even look at me. I was disowned. Estranged. Cast aside like I was some kind of traitor. In a daze, I left the house. I didn't know where to go or what to do. I wandered the streets for hours, replaying the scene in my head over and over again. How had things gone so wrong? How had everything fallen apart so quickly? I felt lost, betrayed, and utterly alone. I moved out of town after that. I didn't have much of a choice. My family wouldn't speak to me, and the few friends I had there were too close to them. I needed a fresh start, a place where I wasn't that guy whose family disowned him. So, I moved to a small city a few states over and started over. I found a job at a marketing firm, rented a small apartment, and tried to forget about everything that had happened. Years passed. I built a life for myself. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I made new friends, dated a few people, even thought about getting married once. But there was always this weight on my shoulders, this feeling that something was missing. I had cut off all contact with my family, but I still thought about them every day. I wondered if they ever thought about me. I wondered if they knew the truth, that I hadn't conspired with Granddad, that I was just as shocked as they were. Then, one day, out of the blue, I got a letter. It was from a lawyer's office in my hometown. At first, I thought it might be about Granddad's will. Maybe there was some mistake, something they needed to clear up. But when I opened it, my heart nearly stopped. It wasn't about the will. It was about my parents. They had passed away. Together. In a car accident. I didn't know how to feel. I hadn't spoken to them in years. I hadn't even known if they were alive or dead, honestly. And now they were just gone. I was numb. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing I could think of. I went home. When I got back to my hometown, it was like stepping into a time warp. Nothing had changed. The same streets, the same shops, the same old faces. But everything felt different. I felt like a ghost, walking through a life that wasn't mine anymore. I went to the lawyer's office first. He was an older man, balding with a kind face. He told me about the accident, how it was quick, how they didn't suffer. He also told me that they had left me a letter. I opened the letter right there in his office. It was short, just a few lines. But those lines changed everything. Ethan. We're sorry. We should have told you the truth. We should have explained. We were angry, confused. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. There's something you need to know. Something about your grandfather. Something he wanted to tell you. The truth is in the box. Mom and Dad. I stared at the letter, my mind racing. The box. The one thing Granddad had left me. I hadn't thought about it in years. I had kept it, of course, but I never opened it. I didn't want to. It felt like a cruel joke, a reminder of everything I had lost. But now I had to know. I had to know what they were talking about. I left the lawyer's office and drove straight to the storage unit where I had kept the few belongings I had taken with me when I left town. It didn't take long to find the box. It was small, about the size of a shoebox, made of dark wood with intricate carvings on the sides. I remember the day Granddad gave it to me. He had looked so serious, so intent. "Keep this safe," he had said. "You're the keeper of secrets now." I took a deep breath and opened the box. Inside, there was a stack of old letters, tied together with a faded ribbon. I carefully untied the ribbon and started reading. The first letter was dated 50 years ago. It was from my grandfather to my grandmother. As I read it, my hands started to shake. It wasn't just a love letter. It was an apology. He was apologizing for something he had done. Something terrible. Something that had changed everything. I kept reading, letter after letter. Each one painted a clearer picture. My grandfather had been involved in something dark, something he regretted deeply. It seemed that before he built his business, he had made a deal with some dangerous people. People who had helped him get started, but who had also demanded a price he had been paying for the rest of his life. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the secret he had kept from everyone. The secret that had torn our family apart. My grandfather wasn't my biological grandfather. In fact, my father wasn't his biological son. My grandmother had an affair, and my father was the result. Granddad found out after they were married, after my father was born. He was devastated. But he stayed. He stayed for the family, for the appearance of normalcy. He raised my father as his own, but he never fully forgave my grandmother. The letters went on, detailing the pain, the betrayal, the anger. My grandfather had written them over the years, pouring out his feelings on paper but never sending them. And then, the last letter. It was to me. Ethan. If you're reading this, then you know the truth. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry I put this burden on you. But you're the only one I could trust. You're the only one who understands what it means to keep a secret. I've spent my life paying for my mistakes, but I couldn't live with this one. I couldn't live with a lie. I wanted to tell your father the truth, but I couldn't. I didn't want to hurt him. I didn't want to hurt you. I know this is a lot to take in. I know it's not fair. But you deserve to know. You deserve to know where you come from, who you really are. I'm sorry, Ethan. I hope you can forgive me. Granddad. I sat there for a long time, staring at the letter. I didn't know what to think, what to feel. I had spent years hating my family, thinking they had abandoned me over money. But it was never about the money. It was about the truth. A truth that had been buried for decades, a truth that had torn us apart. I realized then why my parents had disowned me. They must have found out somehow. Maybe they had read the letters, maybe Granddad had told them before he died. But they didn't know how to deal with it. They were angry, confused, just like I was now. They needed someone to blame, and I was the easiest target. But now they were gone. And I was left with the truth. The real truth. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to move forward. But I knew one thing, I couldn't keep it a secret anymore. I decided to go see Tim. He was the only family I had left, and he deserved to know the truth too. I wasn't sure how he would react, but I had to try. I drove to his house, the big, fancy house he had inherited from Granddad. When he opened the door, he looked surprised to see me. We hadn't spoken since the day of the will reading. Ethan, he said cautiously. What are you doing here? I need to talk to you, I replied. It's about Granddad. And the will. He invited me in, and we sat down in the living room. I told him everything, about the letters, about the truth, about why our family had been torn apart. He listened, his face growing more serious with each word. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then, he spoke. I knew there was something, he said quietly. Granddad always treated me differently. I thought it was because he saw me as the heir, the one who would take over the business. But now it makes sense. He paused, looking at me with a mix of sadness and understanding. I'm sorry, Ethan, he said. I'm sorry for everything. I didn't know. I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't alone. Like maybe, just maybe, I could start to heal. We talked for hours that day, about the past, about the future, about how to move forward. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was a start. A start of something new, something better. In the weeks that followed, Tim and I started to reconnect. We spent more time together, talking about Granddad, our parents, and the family we used to have. I learned more about Tim's side of the story, how he had felt pressured by Granddad to be the perfect heir, the perfect grandson. He had always felt like he was living in my shadow, always second best. He had resented me for it, which is why he had been so quick to accept his inheritance and cut me out. As we talked, I realized that Tim had his own demons to deal with, his own pain and insecurities. We were both victims of a legacy we didn't fully understand, a legacy built on secrets and lies. It wasn't fair, but it was what it was. We had to deal with it, move forward. One day, while we were going through some old family photos, Tim found an old journal. It was my grandmother's. We hadn't found it when we went through her things after she passed away. It must have been hidden away, forgotten. We opened it and started reading. The journal was filled with entries about her life, her marriage, her regrets. She wrote about the affair, about how she had fallen in love with a man who wasn't her husband. She wrote about how she had tried to make things right, how she had tried to be a good wife, a good mother. She wrote about the guilt she felt, the shame. But there was something else in the journal, something that caught us both off guard. She wrote about a child. A child she had given up. A child that wasn't my father. A child that no one knew about. Tim and I looked at each other, our eyes wide. Could it be true? Could there be another family member out there, someone we didn't know about? We decided to investigate. We needed to know the truth. We started digging, going through old records, asking questions. It wasn't easy. Most people who would have known were long gone. But we didn't give up. We kept searching, kept digging. And then, finally, we found something. It was an old adoption record, dated a few years after my father was born. It listed my grandmother as the birth mother, but the father's name was left blank. The baby had been adopted by a family in a neighboring town. A baby girl. Tim and I were stunned. We had a sister. A half-sister. Somewhere out there, we had a sister we had never met, never known about. We didn't know what to do, how to feel. It was overwhelming. But we knew one thing, we had to find her. We had to find out if she was alive, if she knew anything about us. We started searching, using the adoption records as a starting point. It took weeks, months of digging, of hitting dead ends, of almost giving up. But finally, we found her. Her name was Sarah. She lived in a small town a few hours away. She was married, had 2 kids. We decided to reach out to her. We weren't sure how she would react, if she would even want to meet us. But we had to try. We sent her a letter, explaining who we were, what we had found out. We told her that we understood if she didn't want to meet us, if she didn't want anything to do with us. But we hoped, we really hoped, that she would. A few weeks later, we got a response. She wanted to meet. She was as shocked as we were, as confused. But she wanted to know more, to know about her past, her family. We arranged to meet at a small cafe halfway between our towns. When we met her, it was surreal. She looked so much like my father, like our grandmother. There was an instant connection, an instant bond. We talked for hours, sharing stories, sharing memories. She told us about her life, her adoptive parents, how she had always felt like something was missing, like there was a part of her she didn't know. As we talked, I realized that this was it. This was what Granddad had wanted. This was the truth he had wanted us to find. Not just the truth about him, about our family's past, but the truth about ourselves, about who we really were. We were more than just a family torn apart by secrets and lies. We were a family trying to find its way back together. In the months that followed, we spent more time with Sarah and her family. We got to know each other, to build new memories, new connections. It wasn't easy. There were still a lot of questions, a lot of things we didn't understand. But we were trying. We were moving forward. I decided to stay in my hometown for a while, to reconnect with my roots, to be closer to the family I still had left. Tim and I started talking about what to do with Granddad's estate, the business. We didn't want it to be a source of pain anymore, a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. We wanted it to be something positive, something that could help us heal. We decided to sell the business and use the money to start a foundation in Granddad's name. It would be dedicated to helping families, to providing support for those dealing with loss, with secrets, with the pain of the past. It felt like the right thing to do, a way to honor his memory, to make something good out of all the pain. Looking back now, I realize that the inheritance wasn't about money or property. It was about finding the truth, about finding each other. It was about healing, about forgiveness, about moving forward. It was about realizing that family isn't just about blood or shared history. It's about love, about connection, about being there for each other, no matter what. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand everything that happened, why things turned out the way they did. But I do know one thing, I'm not alone anymore. I have my family back, in a way I never thought possible. And that, more than anything, is worth more than any inheritance. Because some secrets are worth keeping, but some are worth revealing. And sometimes, the truth is the only thing that can set you free.